In this video, you will get lessons from this #1 bestseller book. I'm offering this lesson to you for free as part of my company's mission to help you reach your music dreams and have fun along the way. You will find the playlist with all videos from this course in the video description and comments. There may be information in previous videos that will make the video you are watching now easier to understand. I recommend watching the videos in order. Hi, I'm Dan Spencer, author of the Best Music Theory book for beginners. Over 5,000 people have purchased this book, pushing it to hit #1 bestseller in its category on Amazon. Finally, if you would like to get this #1 book, the workbook, for free, along with quizzes, interactive flashcards, and more bonuses, links are in the video description and in the comments. And now, here is the next lesson and the Best Music Theory course, Level 1. Welcome to Pitch and Notes 3, where we're going to talk about scales. Buckle in. This is going to be a long chapter, and you are going to learn so many cool, awesome, amazing music theory things. So first, let's describe and understand what a scale is. So scales are a collection of notes in musical alphabetical order, from lowest to highest or from highest to lowest sounding. Scale rules: #1, a scale from lowest note to highest is called an ascending scale, and a scale from highest note to lowest is a descending scale. 2, scales begin and end on the same pitch class, 1 octave apart. So if a scale starts on F4, it's going to end on F5. If a descending scale starts on C6, it's going to end on C5. If an ascending scale starts on G2, it's going to end on G3. And if a descending scale starts on C5, it's going to end on C4. The name of the scale is the pitch class it starts on, followed by the type of scale. So for example, we're going to talk about a chromatic scale in the next lesson. So let's practice this now. Let's say we have a chromatic scale that starts on the pitch class of A. It doesn't matter what octave register. It could be A1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Doesn't matter. So the chromatic scale starts on A, so we're going to say it is an A chromatic scale. Now let's say we have a chromatic scale that starts on C. Again, it doesn't matter what octave register, just the pitch class. We're going to call that a C chromatic scale. Let's say we have a chromatic scale that starts on F sharp. We're going to call it an F sharp chromatic scale, and it doesn't matter if it's ascending or descending. Doesn't matter if it's going from low to high or high to low. We're still just going to use the formula of the note that it starts on, the pitch class, then the type of scale. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about chromatic scales. Now, a chromatic scale is a 12-note scale, or a dodecatonic scale. You don't need to remember the dodecatonic. You can just call it a 12-note scale. Now, the name chromatic actually comes from the word chroma, which means color in Greek. With this scale, you're actually going to hear and play all 12 notes in the octave, making it a very colorful scale indeed. You can also think about each note being a pitch color that is represented in the scale. So chromatic scale is going to use all 12 notes, all 12 half steps. If you think about the full musical alphabet going around, it's all those half steps. So as we recall from learning half steps, we have that little upside down V is going to indicate the space of 1 half step. Now we know it's a C chromatic scale because, well, it starts on C and we're calling it a C chromatic scale. Remember, that's how we name a scale. We say the pitch class it starts on plus the type of scale, so C chromatic scale. And then we also know from our scale rules that it's going to go from low to high in the order of the musical alphabet. So what we're going to see here is a C chromatic scale where flats are used only, because when we have our two enharmonic equivalents, let's say we have C sharp and D flat, well, we can't have both in a scale, and we'll unpack that later. But basically, we're just going to pick all the flats. So we're going to go D flat, E flat, G flat, A flat, instead of C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, like that. So here's the order of the notes from low to high. We start on C, then we have D flat, then D, then E flat, then E, then F, then G flat, then G natural, then A flat, then A, natural, then B flat, then B natural, then C. All right, there you go. We started on C4, we ended on C5. That's an ascending C chromatic scale. Now we're going to go down, we're going to descend the chromatic scale. So we start on C, then we go to B flat, to A flat, G to G flat, F, E, E flat, D, D flat, and C. And as always, I recommend you listen to these book examples. Go listen to 62 and 63. Let's talk about the C chromatic scale, but this time starting on C, but using sharp notes. So the way that that's constructed is like this. So we start on C, then we go to C sharp, then D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and we end on C. We started on C4, we ended on C5. That's a C chromatic scale, ascending, or you could also say it in reverse order, an ascending C chromatic scale, going from low to high. Now, we can also have a descending C chromatic scale. So we have C, B, A sharp, A natural, G sharp, G natural, F sharp, F natural, E natural, which we're putting that natural on the E in there as a courtesy accidental because there's so many sharps and flats. We're just being extra kind. D sharp, D natural, C sharp, C natural. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to write your first scale, how to write chromatic scales. So you're going to set up a treble clef and a double bar line on a single line of staff. And as always, we're going to do this in two parts. I'm going to talk you through it, show you through it in the first time. Second time, I'm actually going to write it out in real time with you so you can follow along. Now, we're only going to do two types of chromatic scales in this book in level 1. We're going to do chromatic scales that start on C and chromatic scales that start on G. You can start the scale on any pitch class of C or G that you know how to write with the treble clef and the ledger lines. So you're always going to start and end on the same pitch class. If you start on a C, you're going to end on a C. If you start a G, you're going to end on a G. And you're going to write all 12 notes and the starting pitch class 1 octave higher or lower. Now you're going to use the full musical alphabet for guidance so that you write the correct enharmonic equivalents. Remember to use the common enharmonic equivalents like C and not B sharp, and write the scale name above the staff. Now we're going to have two different ways of writing the chromatic scale. We're going to write the chromatic scale using only flats for the enharmonic equivalents, or we're going to write the chromatic scale using only sharps for the enharmonic equivalents. We're going to look first at writing flats. And again, don't worry if you don't catch it this first time around. I'm going to do this in a second video where I actually write it and talk you through it as I write it. To write a C chromatic scale ascending from low to high using flats, this is exactly what it's going to look like. So C, D flat, D natural, E flat, E natural, F, G flat, G natural, A flat, A natural, B flat, B natural, and back to C. And descending, we do it the other way around. Now, something interesting to notice is that when you do it the other way around, you don't actually need to write the natural signs in front of the notes. And that's because notes are always assumed to be natural. So the only reason why you need to write the natural accidentals on the way up is because you have the flat accidental first. So you need to cancel that flat accidental out on the next note and say, oh yeah, no, this is now D natural. Same thing, E flat, the natural now has E flat, the flat accidental now has the power, cancel the power out with a natural. So on the way down, on descending, the first note is B. You don't need to put a natural accidental there because all notes are assumed to be natural and don't need a natural accidental, just in their natural state. And then the second note is B flat, and you need to write the flat. And the next note is A, so we have no more Bs, so you don't need to worry about writing a B natural. And we go down just like that. So I'll see you in the next video where I'm going to write out an ascending and descending C and G chromatic scale. I will see you there. In this lesson, we're going to be writing ascending and descending C and G chromatic scales using natural notes and flat notes only. You're going to set yourself up first with a treble clef on the left side of your staff, and then a double bar line at the end. Now, why we're using a double bar line instead of a final bar line is because there isn't actually a song, there isn't actually a time signature. So this is just an exercise, and the double bar line just says, hey, this is the end of the exercise. So we're going to use this entire staff line to write an ascending C chromatic scale using flats and naturals. So you can start on a C4 or a C5. So you can write from C4 to C5 or from C5 to C6, just for the sake of doing something a little different. So I'm going to write using whole notes starting on C5. Okay, and then a half step up from C5 using flats is going to be D flat. Half step up from that is going to be D natural. Let's keep this going. Half step up, E flat. Half step up, E natural. And my handwriting's a little messy. Your handwriting might be a lot neater. You might take a lot longer with it, and that would be great. Every teacher that I ever had when I was in school always gave me a hard time about my handwriting, but here we are. Okay, and then the next note is going to be F, and we don't need a natural accidental here, but maybe we'll be super courteous and just pop one in there. Then we have a G flat, would be the correct enharmonic equivalent that we come to next. And next would be G natural. Then we have A flat, so we need one ledger line. That's our A flat. And then we have an A natural. And then we have a B flat up next. That sits on top of the first ledger line, B flat. And then we have a B natural. And finally ending with, looks like I might have written these a little close together, but that's okay. Ending with a C. There we go. All right, yeah, so I only took up about half the staff, but that's because I was zoomed in. I couldn't really see what I was doing in the large scale of things. You can space your notes out a lot more, and in the next one, I'll be sure to space mine out a lot more. So now I'm going to write a descending C chromatic scale starting on C5. So starting at the same octave, but this time going down to C4. And again, I'm going to be using flats. So C, next note is B. Whoop, that one's a little pancakey, huh? Next one is going to be B. Next one is a B flat. Next note is going to be A, and then we go to A flat. Then we go to G, followed by G flat. Then we go to F, and remember from the full musical alphabet, there's no sharps or flats between F and E, so we go one half step down from F down straight to E, and then we go to E flat, and then we go to D, then we go down a half step to D flat, and finally we end one ledger line below the staff with C. So that's a descending C chromatic scale from C to C. Now I'm going to demonstrate an ascending and descending G chromatic scale. I'm going to start on G3 for my ascending G chromatic scale. Boom, boom. Start on a G. Again, I'm just going to use whole notes for simplicity. And remember, we're using flats. So the next note, there's one half step up, is going to be A flat. Half step up from A flat, sure enough, is going to be A natural. Half step up from A natural is going to be B flat. Half step up from B flat is B natural. Half step up from B natural is C. Remember, no sharps or flats between B and C. Then next note we're going to have is a D flat. We can make that a little larger there. There we go. Next note is going to be a D natural. Then we're going to have an E flat, followed by, you guessed it, an E natural. Remember, no sharps or flats between E and F. So the next note is just F. And then we have G flat. And then we end the scale. Ooh, let's do that again. The problem with that is you really couldn't see the line in the whole of the accidental. There we go. And then we end with a G natural. So that is a G chromatic scale ascending. And again, take your time with it. Make it look neater than mine. My handwriting is not exemplary. Now let's do a descending G chromatic scale. This time I'm going to start on G5. So I'm going to start on the G above the staff. Work my way down, again, only using natural notes and flat notes. So here's G, G flat, F, go straight to E. There's no flats or sharps. Then we go to E flat. And we go to D. Then we go to D flat, which point we arrive at C. We go straight to B. Remember, no sharps or flats between B and C. Then we're going to go to, that's a little long there. There we go. Go to B flat. And then we're going to go to A, followed by A flat, which brings us home to G. And that's a descending G chromatic scale. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk about chromatic scales ascending and descending, but instead of using flats, using sharps. And we're going to be using C and G as our starting notes for both ascending and descending chromatic scales using sharps and natural notes. Let's go ahead and jump straight in to some staff so I can show you and talk you through writing through these chromatic scales. And you can always go check out your examples on page 79. So every time you write a scale, you're always going to start off by writing a treble clef. And then also writing a double bar line at the end of the staff. There we go. All right, so I'm going to start by writing a C chromatic scale ascending using only sharps. I'm going to start on C4, but you could start on C5 if you want to. Okay, so here's C. Half step up. It's going to be C sharp. The next note, which is a half step up, is D. Then we go to, you guessed it, D sharp. Next up is E. Remember, between E and F, there's no sharps or flats, so we go straight to F. From F, we go to F sharp. F sharp, we go to G. That's one half step up. From G to G sharp. From G sharp to A. From A to A sharp. From A sharp to B. And from B to C. And that's an ascending C chromatic scale from C4 to C5. And if you don't recall from the last lesson, my handwriting is a little messy. You can make yours a lot neater than mine. So now we're going to do a descending C chromatic scale. This time I'm going to start from C6, descending using sharps and naturals only. So we start on C. The next note, down 1/2 step, is going to be B because there's no sharps and there's no flats between C and B. Next note is going to be A sharp. Then we're going to go to A natural. Then we're going to go to G sharp. Then we have G natural. Then we have F sharp. Let's do that F sharp again. There we go. We have F sharp. Then we have F natural. Then we go down 1/2 step to E. Because remember, there's no sharps or flats between F and E. We down 1/2 step to D sharp. Again, let's do that one again. There we go, that's better. D sharp, down 1/2 step to D natural. Down 1/2 step to C sharp. That sharp's a little kooky there. Let's fix that. There we go. Down 1/2 step to C sharp, and then let's finish on C natural. There you go. Descending and ascending C chromatic scale using sharps and flats, and you do the same exact thing for the key of G. You would just use G and then sharp notes for the enharmonic equivalents, and then for descending, you do it just like this with natural notes, canceling out those sharp accidentals on the way down. I will see you in the next lesson. In the next 2 lessons, we are going to be talking about scale degrees. So scale degrees are names and numbers given to notes in the ascending version of any scale. Now, these same names and numbers will apply to the descending, but we're going to keep them in the order of the ascending, and we're going to look at that in the next lesson. One more thing, just to plant in your brain, is that when we see scale degree numbers, the scale degree numbers are going to stay the same as the ascending scale, even in different octave registers. So why do we use scale degrees? We use scale degrees so we can understand and analyze scales and also melodies of famous songs that you know and you love later on in this course. We also use scale degrees so that we can tell the difference between scale degrees and other things in music theory that also use numbers. So because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, we have all these numbers we use in everyday life. We use those numbers for many different things in music theory. So we want to make sure we add one little symbol to the numbers that we use to talk about scale degrees to make sure that we're talking about scale degrees. And that number is a caret or a carré, which is like a little roof over each number that shows us specifically that we're talking about a scale degree, not something else that might use the regular numbers we use in everyday life. And this caret or carré looks like that right there. Just that little whoop, whoop. That's it. That's the carré or the caret. So for example, if we have a scale that starts on C, for example, a C chromatic scale, C is going to be scale degree 1. If we have a G chromatic scale, we start on a G, guess what's going to be scale degree 1? G is going to be scale degree 1. If we had a scale that started on A would be scale degree 1. If we had a scale that started on B would be scale degree 1. So whatever note the scale starts on, specifically the ascending scale, that is going to be scale degree 1, and then every note in the scale after that gets another number. So practice writing scale degrees. All you got to do is just write a regular number and then give it a roof, a regular number, and give it a roof, a regular number, and give it a roof, a regular number, and give it a roof. That's all you got to do for scale degrees. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk even more about scale degrees and understand a little bit more about them. So in the last lesson, we learned that scale degrees are just regular numbers that have a little roof or caret over them. We need to put that caret there to make sure we know we're talking about scale degrees and we're not just using random numbers to talk about something else. And we also know that scale degrees are important because they're going to help us understand scales better and also understand melodies better, and also help us to analyze and understand the music that you want to analyze and understand at the end of this course. So let's talk a little bit more about what happens when notes are repeated in a scale, because as we know, every scale starts and ends with the same pitch class 1 octave apart, either ascending or descending. So here's the question. We have 12 notes in a chromatic scale. It's a dodecatonic. What happens when we add the 13th note, which is the repeated pitch class that we started on? So for example, we start on a C chromatic scale. We have to put a C up at the end, which is going to essentially be the 13th note. Now, do we call that scale degree 13? Or do we call that scale degree 1 because it's the same note that we saw at the beginning? Well, here's the answer on that. We are going to call it scale degree 1. So it does not matter what octave register we find these notes in. You see here we have C4, which is scale degree 1. And over here we have C5, which is also scale degree 1. And let's say we wrote a scale from C5 to C6, and we had a C6 up here. Well, sure enough, guess what would happen? We would call C6 scale degree 1. So it does not matter what octave register you find a scale degree in, it's always going to keep its number, always. Now, because we're only looking at the ascending scale for the order of scale degrees, when we look at a descending scale, the order reverses. Now, you don't need to worry too much about the reverse order because you're always going to think about things from low to high. It's much easier to think about scales and later intervals, and even later than that, chords going from low to high. It's just easier for your brain to do. So we can see that when we have descending scale degrees, they're actually the same as the ascending. So C4 to C4 are both scale degree 1, even though this note down here is the last note in the descending scale. We're still going to call it scale degree 1. D flat is scale degree 2. D flat here, even though it's technically the 12th note in the descending C chromatic scale, we're still going to call it scale degree 2 because we're always going off of the order, not of the descending scale, but the order of the notes in the ascending scale. Always, always, always the ascending scale. So one more example for you in terms of it not mattering what octave register things are in. So imagine we had scale degree 2, but instead of being a D flat 4, it was a D flat 5. That would still be scale degree 2. So it does not matter what octave register you are in. The numbers are going to stay the same always. Now, I do add these numbers in parentheses at the end of the scale just so you can think in terms of, okay, there are technically 13 notes. Or when we see the major scales in the next lesson, there are technically 8 notes. But that's in parentheses because it's not technically scale degree 13. It really is just scale degree 1 because it does not matter what octave register the notes are in. They keep the same scale degree number. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson and the next few lessons, we're going to be talking about major scales. Major scales are so useful because you will find them everywhere in all kinds of music, in all kinds of genres. So the diatonic major scale is a 7-note scale, which is a heptatonic. You do not need to remember that it is a heptatonic, but that's a fancy fun word if you do want to remember it, that you can pull out and impress people and say, oh yes, the major scale, it's a heptatonic scale. So the word diatonic specifically means anything to do with the major scale. Diatonic equals major scale. That word comes from ancient Greek and literally means major scale, which is two tetrachords separated by a whole step. We're going to look at tetrachords in a bit, so don't worry about those too much now. It's most common to refer to a diatonic major scale just as major scale without the word diatonic. In fact, you can confuse a lot of people by saying diatonic major scale because they'll go, huh? It's also, if you think about it, it's almost redundant because it's like you're saying major scale, because if diatonic means anything about the major scale and you say diatonic major scale, then you're saying major scale, essentially. So you don't need to use the word diatonic. You can just say major scale and everyone will know what you are talking about. If you use the word diatonic, everyone might not know what you are talking about. Here are the major scale rules. Now we're going to present them in this lesson, but we're going to be breaking each one of these down and giving examples of them over the next couple of lessons. We're going to spend a while on the major scales to make sure you really understand everything about them and you have complete control and mastery over the concept and also reading and writing and understanding major scales. So all major scales can be understood, written, and performed with a formula of whole and half steps. So we're going to take some whole steps, we're going to take some half steps. The chromatic scale, we just had half steps. For our major scale, we're going to have a mix of whole steps and half steps. And the order of that is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Memorize that. Just like your chromatic scale, a major scale begins and ends on the same pitch class, one octave apart for ascending or descending. Major scales can start on any note of the full musical alphabet. Any note of the full musical alphabet. But for this book, we're just going to be focusing on C and G for our major scales. Now, one of each letter is always used in a major scale. So you're always going to have one A, one B, one C, one D, one E, one F, and one G, with, of course, whatever note you start on repeating itself at the end, one octave higher or lower if it's a descending scale. It is very useful to remember that there is always some kind of A, B, C, D, E, F, G in every single major scale. So, for example, you will never see an F and an F sharp in a major scale together. There's only going to be one, but there is going to be some kind of F. But you're never going to have an F and an F sharp. You never have a C and a C sharp. When we look at writing major scales, either sharps or flats are used in a major scale. Just like with the chromatic scales, we either use sharps or we either used flats. A major scale will never have both sharps and flat accidentals. And the major step formula, that's that whole, whole, half, stays the same for all major scales. And the first whole step takes place between scale degree 1 and 2. I will see you in the next lesson where we're going to break these rules down and actually look at some major scales. In this lesson, we are just going to talk about the C major scale and our 7 scale rules and how we can understand the C major scale with our 7 scale rules. So scale rule number 1 is all major scales can be understood, written, and performed with a formula of whole and half steps. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And sure enough, we can see here with our swoop unders showing us our whole steps and our little upside down V's or our hats showing us our half steps, we can see that sure enough, we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And we can even see that written below the staff with our useful little diagram right here, that we have the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And we can see that these whole, see that, whole, half, is showing us the steps, whether it's a whole step, whole, 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 and half. Great. Now, our second rule for major scales is that the scale needs to start and end on the same pitch class, one octave apart. And sure enough, we see that this scale starts on C4 and ends on C5. Great. So far, we are 2, 4, 2. Now, we know that major scales can start on any letter of the full musical alphabet, but that's okay for now. Let's talk about major scale rule number 4, and that is one of each letter is always used in the scale. 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, 1F, and 1G before the pitch class that the scale started on repeats. There's always some kind of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G in every major scale. So let's double check that. We have a C, we we have a D, we have an E, an F, a G, an A, a B, and then the pitch class that we started the scale on, the C, repeats 1 octave higher. Okay, so far so good. Neither flats or sharps are used in a major scale. A major scale will never have both flats and sharp accidentals. And here we see that in the C major scale, there are no sharps and there are no flats. That's totally okay too. Now we know that the major step formula stays the same for all major scales. Sure enough, we can see here we have whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half. And this is the important thing to remember. The first whole step of the major scale step formula happens between scale degree 1 and scale degree 2. So sure enough, we can see that we have scale degree 1, that's C. Then we have scale degree 2, that would be D. And that between scale degree 1 and scale degree 2, sure enough, we have a whole step. And between scale degree 2 and scale degree 3, sure enough, we have a whole step. And between scale degree 3 and scale degree 4, sure enough, we have a half step. And we keep on going up that way. 4 to 5, whole step. 5 to 6, whole step. 6 to 7, whole step. 7 back to 1 is a half step. And quick reminder from when we talked about scale degrees a couple lessons ago, that this note right here is scale degree 1. We're just going to add that little 8 in parentheses there. You don't need to do that when you write your scales. That's just so you don't get confused and think, wait, hang on a second, which one is scale degree 1? That's just remind you that there are technically 8 notes in the scale because scale degree 1 that we started the scale on repeats itself 1 octave higher. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the G major scale. We're going to break it down and understand it with our 7 major scale rules. So we know that we need whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. We know that the first whole step takes place between scale degree 1 and scale degree 2. And sure enough, we can see that all that is here. So what we need to really look at for the G major scale are rules 6 and 4. So we're going to start with rule number 4, and that is we need one of each type of letter in the scale. We need one A, B, C, D, E, F, and G in the scale before the pitch class that the scale started on repeats itself 1 octave higher or lower. We also know as part of rule 4 that we cannot have 2 of the same note in a major scale. So we can't have 2 A's, we can't have 2 B's, we can't have 2 C's. We only have one of each. So here's where the step formula really starts to get interesting. And because of rule 6, we know that the major step formula stays the same for all major scales. So let's take a look at how that plays out with a G major scale. Okay, so from G to A, that's a whole step because we have G, G sharp or A flat. We're going to skip G sharp or A flat. We're going to go to A. So from G to A, that's a whole step. Sure enough. From A to B, that's a whole step because we go A, we skip A sharp or B flat, and we go to B. That's a whole step. There are no sharps or flats between B and C, so right there, B to C, that's a half step. If you look at your full musical alphabet in the circle, you will see that B and C are direct neighbors on the full musical alphabet, and because of that, it's just a half step of space. Now from C to D, we go to C, we skip C sharp or D flat, and we go to D. We're skipping, we're going 2 houses down. That's a whole step. From D to E, we're skipping D sharp or E flat. We're going from D, skipping there, over to E. That is a whole step. We're going 2 houses down. And finally, and this is where things get really fun, from E to F sharp is a whole step. Think about it this way. Between E and F, there are no sharps or flats. So from E to F, that's a direct neighbor in the full musical alphabet, which means it's only 1 half step. So we actually need to skip F and go up 1 more half step to F sharp. Now, why is it F sharp and it's not G flat? Well, this is why. If it was G flat, we would have 2 G's in the scale. We'd have G natural and we'd have G flat, and then we also wouldn't have an F. So we're breaking both parts of rule number 4. Rule number 4 is we need to have one A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So we need some kind of F. We need some kind of F, and if we were to make this a G flat, we would have no kinds of F, and that would be wrong, and it would be doubly wrong because we would have two Gs. We'd have a G flat and a G natural, and that's a no-no. We already have our G, so that's why we select the F sharp. That's why we pick that anharmonic equivalent as opposed to the G flat. It's because we want to agree with rule number 4 and have some kind of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G in the scale before the pitch glass that the scale started on repeats. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to write ascending major scales. And we're going to do this lesson in two parts. The first part, I'm just going to talk you through it and walk you through it. And in the second part, you are going to see me write the major scales out and talk through it to make sure you have a complete and full understanding of how to write major scales ascending. So how you write an ascending major scale is first you take a line of staff and you add a treble clef and a double bar line. You can see we're on step 1 right here. Step number 2 is you are going to add the note that the scale is going to start on, also known as scale degree 1. In this case, it is a G. Step number 3, you are going to write with no accidentals, one note on every single line and space up until you reach the note 1 octave higher that you started the scale on. So you can see that we have a note that starts on line 2. That's our G, starts on line 2. Then we have a note in space 2, line 3, space 3, line 4, space 4, line 5, and then the G that sits on top of line 5 above the staff. So you're going to put one note in every line and space of the staff until you get to the octave. Step number 4 is you're going to write your whole and your half step swoops and little hats between the notes to make sure you've really got the whole and the half step formula locked in. And then you're going to double check as step number 5 your whole and half step formula and add in any accidentals that you need to make sure that that formula is correct. In this lesson, we are going to be writing a C major scale and a G major scale in real time. So step number 1, we need a treble clef. Let's do that. And we need a double bar line, not a final bar line, but a double bar line. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with a C major scale. And we're going to start with C4, but you could start on C5 as well if you like. So we're going to start on C4. And I'm going to use whole notes for this, but you could use half notes or quarter notes. Because remember, there's no time signature. It actually doesn't matter the note value because we're not talking about measures. So it doesn't really matter how you write the notes. So that's scale degree 1. Scale degree 2 is D. Scale degree 3 is E. Because remember, we're just going up and we're writing a note on every line and space until we reach the octave of the note we started on. So just one note on every line and space, and you'll see that my iPad is auto-correcting some of my notes here into slightly off shapes. If you're writing by hand, be able to keep them even. So we have A, then B, and then finally C. So we have a note on every line and space, including under the staff, yet we're going to call this right here a space. Because technically this note was on a line and the next note was on a line. So you can think of being under or on the staff as a space. So the next thing for us to do is to label our whole and half steps. We're going to have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Last thing for us to do is to double check and make sure that our whole and half step formula is correct and that we do not need any accidentals. So from C to D, we have C, we skip C sharp or D flat, we get to D. Sure enough, that's a whole step. That's 2 houses down on the full musical alphabet. From D to E, well, we have D, then we have D sharp or E flat, then we have E. We're skipping 1 house, we're going 2 houses down. Sure enough, that is a whole step. Very good. From E to F, is that a half step? Let's think about it. Between E and F in the full musical alphabet, there are no sharps or flats, which means yes, that is a half step. Between F and G is a whole step, and here's why. We go F, F sharp or G flat. To G, we skip F sharp or G flat. In the full musical alphabet, we go F to G. From G to A, we skip G sharp or A flat. So G to A, that's 2 houses down. That is a whole step. And then from A to B, we're skipping A sharp or B flat. So go A, B, that's 2 houses down. That's a whole step. Sure enough, that is the whole step. And then finally, we have B to C, which is a half step, which is correct because between B and C, there are no sharps or flats in the full musical alphabet. So that right there is how you write an ascending C major scale. Now we're going to do a G major scale. You're going to start with a treble clef, and then you're going to write a double bar line at the end of your staff. There we go. And the starting note is going to be G. Now you can start on G3 or G4. I'm going to start on G3. I'm going to write the ledger lines. Boom. Boom. Okay, and there's our G. Okay, so now we need to write one note on every line and space of the staff or ledger lines until we get to the G 1 octave higher. So don't even need to think about the note names. Just write the note on the next line up, on the next space up, on the next line, on the next space, on the next line, on the next space, or in the next space rather, and then on the next line. So right there, we have space, line. Here, I'll color these. Space, line, space, line, space, line, space, and then space, line, space, line, space, line, space, line. So all we're doing is we're just alternating lines and spaces going up 1 octave higher. Yep, from G to G, from G3 to G4. Now the next thing for us to do is to label our whole and half steps. We have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now it's time for us to check our whole and half steps and see if we need to add any accidentals. So from G to A on the full musical alphabet, we go G, G sharp or A flat to A. So we're going 2 houses down. That is a whole step. Great, that's perfect. We don't need to change anything. From A to B, think about the full musical alphabet. A sharp or B flat to B. We're skipping A sharp or B flat. We're going 2 houses down. That is a whole step. From B to C, remember there are no sharps or flats between B and C, so that is a half step. We've got that right because they are neighbors on the full musical alphabet. Between C and D is a whole step, and I'll show you why. We go C, C sharp or D flat, D, and we're skipping C sharp or D flat, so we're going 2 houses down on the full musical alphabet. So that's correct. We don't need to change anything there. Between D and E, we go D, D sharp or E flat to E on the full musical alphabet, so we're skipping D sharp or E flat. That means between D and E is a whole step. Now from E to F, there's no sharps or flats between E to F, so that's a half step. So we have a problem here. And the problem is we need a whole step, and right now what we have written is a half step. So we need to add something here that's going to increase the distance between E and F by 1 half step, and that is going to be our sharp accidental, which is going to raise the F or move the F 1 step further or 1 house down on the full musical alphabet, which means we're skipping F, going to F sharp, which means we now have a whole step, and then between F sharp to G is a half step because F sharp and G flat and G are neighbors on the full musical alphabet. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about how to write descending major scales. So step number one for writing a descending major scale is you need a treble clef and a double bar line. Step number two, you're going to write the note that you're going to start the descending scale on. Step number three, just like with the major scales, you're going to write a note on every line and space of the staff, except this time, instead of writing them ascending, you're going to write it on every line and space descending down to the right. Step number four, you add your whole and your half step swoops and little hats in to make sure that you know where you are. Now, here's the thing, because you're descending, the order of whole and half steps is reversed. So you're actually going to write from right to left, but I'll walk you through that in the next lesson. So think about it this way. We have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, because we think about the major step formula as going from low to high, not high to low. It's reversed here. It's going whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half. And if you think about it backwards, it's half, whole, 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 half, whole, whole, which is terribly confusing. Don't even think about it that way. Always think about it from low to high. And then our last step is to add in any accidentals that are needed to agree with the series of whole and half steps. I'm going to be writing down and talking you through writing a descending major scale for C and G major. So we start off with a treble clef. And we're going to add a double bar line. I'm not going to add mine at the end of the staff because I'm always zoomed in on this iPad. I'm just going to add it right here. And if you're writing small, it's fine if you write your double bar line a little more to the left as opposed to all the way at the end of the staff. I'm going to start on C6 for the descending major scale. You could start on C6 or C5 for your descending major scale. So remember, the first thing we need to do is we need to write one note on every line and space of the staff or ledger lines from the note we start on to one octave lower than what we started on, because we're doing a descending scale here. So let's start with our ledger lines. So we have C, then we're going down. Then the next note is going to be on a space because we just did a line. So we have space. Next note is going to be a line. Next note is going to be a space. Remember, the top of the staff is technically a space. Then we have a line. Then we have a space. Then we have a line. Then we have a space. And that is one octave right there from C to shining C. Next thing for us to do is to label our whole and half steps. Now, here's the thing. Because this is descending, we're actually going to label it from right to left, because we always think about the major step formula as going from low to high. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to do whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Just like that. Let's check our whole and half steps, and let's also check from right to left as if the scale was ascending. And this way you're just going to make it a little bit easier on your brain because you only have one way of doing things as opposed to two ways of doing things. Okay, so from C to D, we're skipping C sharp or D flat, so that's two houses down, that's a whole step. From D to E, we're skipping D sharp or E flat, that's two houses down, that's a whole step. From E to F, that is a half step because there are no sharps or flats between E and F. Between F and G, we're skipping F sharp or G flat. That's a whole step. Between G and A, we're skipping G sharp or A flat. That's then a whole step. And between A and B, we're skipping A sharp or B flat. That is a, let me hear you say it, whole step. And then from B to C, remember there's no sharps or flats between B and C, so they are direct neighbors on the full musical alphabet, and that right there is a half step. Great, so that's how you write a descending C major scale. Now let's do a descending G major scale. So the first step for writing a descending G major scale, you get a new line of staff and you write a treble clef. Then you're going to write a double bar line at the end of the staff, or for me, because I'm zoomed in, I'm just going to write it over here. Okay, so you could start writing your descending G major scale on G5 or G4. I'm going to start mine on G4. So remember, the first thing you need to do when you're writing the notes is you write one note on every line and space of the staff until you reach the octave of the note that you started on, or of the pitch class you started on, one octave lower for descending. So we start with a G. That's really line. We're going to think just about lines and spaces. So that's line. Next note is space. Next note is line. Next note is space. Remember, under and above the staff, that's always a space. The next note is on a line. The next note is in a space. The next note is on a line. And our last note is going to be in a space. There we go. All right. So now we're going to write our whole and half steps from right to left. That's going to be whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. There you go. Whole, half, whole, half. Well, these whole steps down here look a little wiggly, huh? Well, that's okay. So now we're going to double check our whole and half steps again from right to left so we can think about the scale as if it's going from low to high. So G to A. We're skipping G sharp or A flat, so that's 2 houses down on the full musical alphabet. That is a whole step. That's good. From A to B, we're skipping A sharp or B flat in the full musical alphabet. That is a whole step. That's 2 houses down. That's great. From B to C, remember there are no sharps or flats between B and C. That is a half step. That's good. Between C and D, we're skipping C sharp or D flat, which means we're going 2 houses down. That's a whole step. That's great. Between D and E, we're skipping D sharp or E flat, which is indeed going 2 houses down in the full musical alphabet, which means that's a whole step. Now from E to F, we have a symbol right here that says we need a whole step. But from E to F on the full musical alphabet, think about it, E to F, they're neighbors. E to F is a half step. So we need to do something here. We need some kind of intervention. We need some kind of symbol here to make sure that between E and F is actually a whole step and not a half step. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a sharp accidental in front of the F, and that now gets us our whole step because we're going from E, we're skipping F, and going to F sharp. And remember, the reason why it's F sharp and not G flat is we need some kind of F in every major scale. And if we turn that into a G flat, then we wouldn't have an F note. So we need to keep that F note. Also, just by writing every note on every line and space of the staff when you're structuring your scale in step 3 of writing out your scale, you're already saving yourself the trouble by making sure you have one of each note. And then lastly, between F sharp and G, sure enough, is a half step, and that's a descending G major scale starting on G4. I will see you in the next. In this lesson, we're going to talk about scale degree names. So we've talked about scale degree numbers. So whatever note the scale starts on, that's going to be scale degree 1. The second note of the scale is going to be scale degree 2. Third note of the scale will be scale degree 3. The fourth note of the scale will be scale degree 4, and so on. So for example, in a C major scale, C would be scale degree 1, D scale degree 2, E scale degree 3, F scale degree 4, G scale degree 5, A scale degree 6, B scale degree 7, and then C scale degree 1, technically the 8th note in the scale. So now we're going to learn that there's actually names for the scale degrees for major scales. Now these scale degree names are the first step to doing even larger analysis on music that's going to help you get even greater understanding of the music that you love. So it's very important that you actually remember these names, because the names of these scale degrees are not only going to show up again in this book, in this course, but in future books, future courses, and also in other music theory that you might learn for the rest of your life. So pay attention to these because these are important. Each scale degree has a name in addition to its assigned number. The name of the scale degree describes the function of the note in the scale, and we will unpack that at another time. The scale degree names are the same for all major scales. So scale degree 1 for a C major scale is C. Scale degree 1 for G major scale is G. We're not calling it 1C or 1G. We just call it scale degree 1. And just like scale degree numbers apply to the pitch class in any octave register, scale degree names apply to the pitch class in any octave register. So for example, scale degree 1, C4 is also scale degree 1, C5. It's also scale degree 1 as C6. You will be briefly introduced to the scale degree names in this lesson, and then we're going to do a deep dive on each name and really talk about them and understand more about each scale degree name in the next lesson. So scale degree 1, the name of scale degree 1 is the tonic. The name of scale degree 2 is the supertonic. The name of scale degree 3 is the mediant, not the median, but the mediant with a T. Scale degree 4 is called the subdominant. Scale degree 5 is called the dominant. Scale degree 6 is called the submediant. Scale degree 7 is called the leading tone, and then we're back to scale degree 1, which is the tonic. So just to hammer home the idea of it does not matter what note the scale starts on, the name and number remain the same. So we see here that the scale starts on C. C is scale degree 1, and the name of scale degree 1 is the tonic. Now for a G major scale, the scale starts on G. G is scale degree 1, and the name of G and scale degree 1 would be the tonic. We don't change it based on the key. We don't change it based on the note. We just say tonic for any note that is scale degree 1 of a major scale. I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to break down and understand even more about the scale degree names for the major scale. So as we learned in the last lesson, we have the tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant, leading tone, and then we're back to the tonic for scale degree 8, because as we know, every major scale starts and ends on the same pitch class 1 octave apart. So let's start by talking about the tonic, scale degree 1. So this is the first scale degree. This is the note that gives the scale its name. If the tonic is a C, the scale is a C major scale, and then when it's repeated 1 octave higher is also the tonic, because it's really scale degree 1 again. The supertonic, that's scale degree 2. Super means above. Think like Superman. Superman flies above the clouds. So Superman, supertonic. So the supertonic is just the note that is, well, above the tonic. As we can see, we have the D, which is, sure enough, higher up, closer to the ceiling than the C. So the supertonic. Now the mediant. You can think about the median that divides a highway. The mediant divides the space between scale degree 1 and scale degree 5. It's halfway between scale degree 1 and scale degree 5, right here. That's our mediant. So that's why we call it the mediant, because it divides the space between 1 and 5. Scale degree 4 is the subdominant. So sub, like a submarine, means under. So submarine goes under the water, and the subdominant is under the dominant. So we can see scale degree 5 is the dominant. Spoilers, but that the dominant here is lower than scale degree 5, right? It's on space 1, whereas scale degree 5 is on line 2. So it's under, it's lower than the dominant, so it's the subdominant. Scale degree 5 is called the dominant. Now it's called the dominant because, as you will see later on in music theory, there's going to be a lot of things that happen between the tonic and the dominant is going to be very important. And that's why it's called the dominant, because it is important. Scale degree 6 is called the submediant. Now it's called the submediant because, well, it's between the dominant and the octave of the tonic. It's not even like the mediant was, there was 2 and 2 and it was here right in the middle. But the submediant is right here, and it is between the tonic and the dominant. So we're going to call that the submediant. Finally, we have the leading tone. The leading tone is also called the tendency tone, and it's called the leading tone because it leads us back to the tonic, and I'm going to show you why. So, if I play this, what should happen next? Huh. Oh, there we go. That's what should happen next because this 7 leads us back to the tonic. So let's listen to that again. Tonic, supertonic, median, subdominant, dominant, submedian. Leading tone wants to go where? Back home to the tonic. So that's why it's called the leading tone, because it literally makes it feel like it wants to lead you back to the tonic. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be talking about tetrachords. Now, you may remember back when we first started talking about the major scale, I said that diatonic actually means 2 tetrachords connected by a whole step. Whoa! We're going to break that down and see what all that actually means. So, tetra means 4, and a tetrachord is a group of 4 notes. So 4 notes in a row, just any 4 notes. Now the tetrachords on this page are used to break down the major scale, and thinking about scales in terms of groups of 4 is actually how the ancient Greeks, who pretty much invented these scales, thought about the major scales. Little piece of history there, you don't need to remember that, but it's a fun fact. They use more tetrachords than what we're looking at here, and in theory, too, understanding tetrachords is going to be very important for when we start looking at more advanced minor scales, like the harmonic minor scale, not to scare you with big words there, but just so you know that tetrachords are going to be useful in the future, not just now in the present moment. So what we're looking at here essentially is a major tetrachord, and in a major tetrachord, we go whole, whole, half. That's it, just whole, whole, half. So if we think about starting from a C is scale degree 1, we go whole, whole, half, just like the major scale, whole, whole, half. Now let's think about a G major tetrachord. So the G major tetrachord starts on the dominant of C, which is G, scale degree 5, and also has a step formula of whole, whole, half. So let's go back and look. Tetrachord number 1, we have whole, whole, half. Tetrachord number 2, we have whole, whole, half. Now what happens when we stick these together and connect them with a whole step? We get whole, whole, half, connect with a whole step, whole, whole, half. So this is a fun and interesting way to break down understanding the major scale that can actually help you remember the major scale and the major step formula a little bit better than you might otherwise. Because you can think about every major scale is just whole, whole, half, throw in a whole step, whole, whole, half, and that's it. That's literally how you can think about a major scale. So if thinking whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half is a little bit too much or it's confusing, just think whole, whole, half, throw in a whole step, whole, whole, half, and you are good to go. So those are tetrachords, and I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson and the next couple of lessons, we are going to be talking about key signatures, what they are, how to write them, how to understand them, and why we even need to know about such a thing as key signatures. So first, let's look at some key signatures so you know what we're talking about, and then we will go through the rules. So these are what key signatures look like. Right there and right there, you see that we have an accidental over there on the right, written on line 5 of the staff, and on the left, there are no accidentals, and those are both key signatures. So let's talk a little bit more about key signatures. So every major scale is related to a key. A key is all the notes of a major scale. So it's like we take all the notes of the major scale, we put them in a bucket, and that's the key. The key of C is all the notes of a C major scale. The key of G is all the notes of a G major scale. When you write or perform music with a key signature, you are going to be in that key. So let's think about it this way. If we were to take all the notes of a G major scale, we would have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. So what we're going to do is we're just going to show in the key signature, hey, by the way, in that scale of G major, we have an F sharp. That's it. And in the key of C major, we go C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. There's no sharps, there's no flats. So in the key signature, there's no sharps and no flats because it's showing us it's like a bucket. It's taking all the notes from the major scale and it's saying, by the way, here are all the notes in the major scale. So let's talk about our key signature rules. So number one, you're going to read and write the key signature between the clef and the time signature. And sure enough, key sig or key signature, I'll call it key sig for short. We can see for C major, because there's no sharps and no flats, it's just blank. And for the key of G major, because there is one sharp, F sharp, that F sharp goes between the treble clef and the time signature. Rule number two, key signatures use sharps and flats and the lack of sharps and flats to indicate the key of a piece of music. And sure enough, we can see no sharps, no flats to show us we're in the key of C, and one sharp to show us we're in the key of G. Rule number three, each accidental has a particular line or space it is always written on for key signatures. For example, the F sharp in the key signature for the treble clef is always written on line 5. So anytime we have a key signature with an F sharp in it, the sharp accidental is always going to go on line 5. It would never go on space 1, even though there is an F note that goes in space 1. The sharp accidental is always going to go on line number 5. Rule number 4. When an accidental is on a line or a space of a key signature, it changes all the notes of that pitch class. So for example, the sharp that we can see right there down on the page, that sharp for G major, that's going to change all the Fs. So right now, sure, this sharp is on the line for F5, right? However, it's going to change F4, it'll change F3, it'll change F2, F1, F6. All Fs that come after that key signature are all going to be sharp in all octave registers. Now we can use natural and other accidentals to cancel out that key signature for a measure. We'll get to that later. And we will talk about rules number 5 and 6, which have to do with accidentals in a later lesson. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking more about key signatures and specifically how and why you'd want to use accidentals when you already have an accidental in the key signature. So let's look at our incorrect example here. So in our incorrect example, we have the key of G major. Now we know it's the key of G major because when we take all the notes of a G major scale, that's G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp, and we put them all in a bucket. Well, the only note that we need to show as not being a natural note is going to be F sharp. So think about this. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. So we're showing that all these notes normally go in the scale, and we're just showing that here in the key signature. So it would be incorrect for us to write a sharp accidental on either of these notes, because from our key signature rules from the last lesson, as soon as we have an accidental in the key signature, it's going to change all octave registers of that pitch class. So because this sharp is on line 5, and when the treble clef, the F note goes on line 5, it's going to change all F notes for all the measures that come after it to be F sharp. So we don't actually need to write these sharp accidentals right here. These are both F sharps. And they're F sharps because the key signature says, hey, all Fs that come after this note, they're all sharp. All notes are F sharp after we have an accidental in the key signature. So we don't need to write the accidentals in. As soon as we see the accidental in the key signature, it automatically changes all the Fs to be sharp. Now let's talk a little bit about natural accidentals, because let's think about it this way. Now all of our Fs are sharp. What if we want an F natural? Well, if we want an F natural, what we're going to have to do is we're actually going to have to go in and write a natural sign. And as you may remember from our accidentals, this accidental only holds power for this measure, unless it's tied to another note. So that's why you would use natural accidentals. It's when you have a sharp or a flat in the key signature and you want the note to no longer be sharp or you want it to no longer be flat, you put an accidental in front of it and that would make it sound natural. Last thing for us to talk about in this lesson is a quick tip to identify key signatures. So whenever you have sharps in a key signature, the sharp that is all the way to the right, in this case we only have one sharp, so it's easy to do. The sharp that is all the way to the right is going to be scale degree 7. So it just so happens that the sharp is on the F line, and it just so happens that F sharp is scale degree 7 of what major scale? G. So that's how we can tell that this is for a G major scale. If you can't already tell by thinking about it, okay, all the notes of a G major scale, we only have an F sharp, just like we talked about before, that this key signature is actually really showing us like this. It's saying, okay, in this key signature, there's a G, there's an A, there's a B, there's a C, there's a D. Notice I'm writing these letter names on the lines where these notes would go. D, there's an E, and there's an F, but the F is sharp. So if that way doesn't quite make sense to you, don't worry about it. Just think about this sharp as being on the line for scale degree 7. Scale degree 7 is F sharp for a G major scale. So that's how we know that whenever we see one sharp in the key signature, we are in the key of G major. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk about how to write key signatures. So the key signature for C major is actually pretty easy to write because you don't actually need to do anything because there's no sharps or flats in the key of C major. So basically what the key signature is doing is it's telling us, by the way, we have in this key a C, a D, an E, an F, a G, an A, and a B. And there's no sharps or flats. So you don't need to write anything. So to write a key signature, all you got to do is write a treble clef and then write a time signature and just make sure you leave just a little bit of space as you would normally do between the treble clef and the time signature. And that's where the key signature is. And I know you can't see the key signature, but it's there. It's just saying there's no sharps or flats because we take all the notes from the C major scale and just show it right there. So now let's talk about writing the key signature for a G major scale because, well, we actually need to do something to show a G major scale. And the reason we need to do something is because if we think about all the notes in a G major scale, that's G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp, we need to show that there's an F sharp in the major scale for the key signature. So because the G major scale has an accidental on scale degree 7, we're going to show that accidental in the key signature. Now remember, the only place you are ever going to write an F sharp accidental in a key signature is on line 5. Even though there is an F note in space 1, and even though there is an F note on the third ledger line below the staff for F3, we're just going to write the sharp accidental on line 5. So to write a G major key signature, all you got to do is write a treble clef, and then you just write a sharp accidental on line 5, and then write a time signature, and you're done. You're ready to go. I'll see you in the next lesson where you will understand how to write major scales using key signatures and why it can actually be a little bit easier to write major scales with key signatures. I'll see you there. In this lesson, we're going to talk about writing major scales with key signatures and actually see why it's actually a little easier to write major scales with key signatures than adding in the accidentals because there's a lot less thinking and it goes a lot faster. And why would we think if we don't have to think? So, writing a C major scale with a key signature, well, the first thing you got to do is write a treble clef and a double bar line on a single line of staff, just like we did for writing the C major scale before. Step number 2 is to write the key signature. Now, you'll notice if you are eagle-eyed, that between step number 1 and step number 2 here on the screen, well, there sure is no difference between step number 1 and step number 2, and that's because to write a C major key signature, all you got to do is nothing, because there's no sharps or no flats, so no action is required. Then, step number 3, write the first note of the scale in any octave register for C or G, and then you just write one note on every line and every space of the staff until you get to the octave, and that's it. That's all you got to do. You don't need to do your swoops and your little roofs for the whole and the half step, the major step formula. You don't need any of that. All you got to do is write the key signature and write one note on every line and every space of the staff for an octave. So let's look at writing a G major scale with a key signature. Step number 1, you write a treble clef, write a double bar line. Step number 2, you actually do need to do something here, which is to write the key signature for G major, which is a sharp accidental on line 5. Then you start by writing your first note, G, and that could be, you could start the scale on G4 or G3, doesn't matter, have fun with both. And then you write one note on every line and every space of the staff up until you reach the octave. Now here's a really cool thing. Remember that the key signature changes all the notes of every octave register for the note line it's on. So this sharp is on the line that the F note goes on. F goes on line 5. And that means it changes all the Fs that come after it to F sharp, which means you don't actually need to write an accidental for the F sharp, because this F right here is automatically made sharp by the accidental. Automatically. You don't need to do anything. You don't even need to think about your whole and your half steps. How cool is that? Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All you got to do, write notes on every line and space of the staff. Now it's the same thing for descending. Descending for G major, for example. You just write your treble clef and your double bar line. Then you write in your key signature, which for G major is just a sharp on line 5 for F. And then you write descending one note on every line and every space of the staff, just like you did for the major scales. But this time you don't need to worry about the whole and the half steps, because the key signature takes care of that. You don't need to calculate and go, oh, whole, whole, half, because this sharp right here on the F line automatically makes all Fs sharp. And you could write this scale starting on G4 to F sharp 4, and you still don't need to write an accidental, because this sharp makes all F notes. It does not matter what octave register they're in. That sharp changes all F notes that come after it to be sharp. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson and in the next couple of lessons, we're going to be talking about a new kind of scale called the natural minor scale. Like the major scale, the natural minor scale is a 7-note heptatonic scale. The reason why it's called natural minor is because the overall order of whole and half steps and the notes actually remain unchanged from the major scale. And you'll see that connection in a moment. So it's not whole, half, whole, half, but it's all going to make sense in this lesson and in the next lessons. Let's talk about our natural minor scale rules. And then in the next lesson, we're going to break those down with actual examples of a natural minor scale. So number 1, all natural minor scales can be understood, written, and performed with a minor step formula. Not a major step formula, but a minor step formula of whole and half steps. And that goes like this: whole, half, whole, half, whole. Memorize it. It's going to help you tons if you memorize that. All natural minor scales begin and end on the same pitch class, 1 octave apart. Natural minor scales can start on any note of the full musical alphabet, and just like major scales, one of each letter is always used in the scale. One A, B, C, D, E, F, and G before the pitch class that the scale started on repeats one octave higher or lower, higher if it's an ascending scale, lower if it's a descending scale. Just like major scales and also chromatic scales, either sharps or flats, or no sharps or no flats, are used in a natural minor scale. A natural minor scale will never have both sharps and flats. Number 6, the minor step formula stays the same for all natural minor scales, all of them. And just like with the major scale, the first whole step happens between scale degree 1 and scale degree 2. In the next lesson, we're going to break down and understand why there is a flat accidental in front of scale degrees 3, 6, and 7, in addition to understanding more about the natural minor scale. I will see you there. In this lesson, we're going to break down and understand more about the A natural minor scale and also why those scale degrees have little flat accidentals in front of them. Oh no, and oh my. Okay, let's get started. It's actually not scary. So just like with the major scale, how we went whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, for the natural minor scale, we go whole, half, whole, half, whole, whole, and it works the same way as the major scale. So scale degree 1 to scale degree 2, there's a whole step between them. Same as the major scale. Now here's where it changes. Scale degree 2 to scale degree 3, there's actually a half step in between them. Scale degree 3 to scale degree 4, there is a whole step. Scale degree 4 to scale degree 5, there is a whole step. Scale degree 5 to scale degree 6, there is a half step. Scale degree 6 to scale degree 7, there is a whole step. And between scale degree 1 and scale degree 8, there is a whole step. We can see that the minor step formula works basically the same way as the major step formula, just with a different series of whole and half steps. Now let's plug that in and make sure it's correct. Okay, from A to B, we're skipping A sharp or B flat, so that's 2 houses down on the full musical alphabet. That's a whole step. From B to C, those are neighbors on the full musical alphabet. That's a half step. That's correct. From C to D, that is a whole step because we're skipping C sharp or D flat. That's good. Between D and E, that's a whole step. We're skipping D sharp and E flat. Between E to F, remember there are no sharps or flats between E and F, so good. That is a half step. F to G, we're skipping F sharp or G flat, so very good. That is a whole step. And then G to A, we're skipping G sharp or A flat, which means we're going 2 houses down on the full musical alphabet, which means it is a whole step. Okay, so now let's understand why scale degree 3, scale degree 6, and scale degree 7 all have these flat accidentals in front of them. Let's break this down. In the major scale, we have scale degree 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to 1. And the series of whole and half steps goes whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And we can see that, highlighting that in red here. Great, this is the major scale. Now in blue, we're going to have the minor scale. We go whole, half, whole, half, whole, whole. And you can see that the way the whole and the half steps are lining up. For example, scale degree 3, because we have whole, whole, right? We have whole, whole. That gets us 1 half step further than if we went whole, half. And you can see that this half step ends right here. And so because scale degree 3 and the natural minor scale happens 1 half step sooner, or another way of thinking about that is 1 half step lower than the major scale, we're going to say, okay, we're actually going to pull it down by 1 half step and give it a flat accidental because we're lowering. If you remember, that flat accidental lowers a pitch by just a little bit, which is 1 half step. So we can see very interestingly that 4 catches up because we have basically in the first 3 scale degrees, in both scales we have 1 whole, 2 whole, 1 whole, 2 whole, and 1/2, 1/2. So it gets us the same distance, just in a different order. So 4 lines up, 5 lines up. Now because we have that half step between 5 and 6 in the natural minor scale, that again pulls 6 down 1/2 step, or makes it happen 1/2 step sooner, whichever way you'd like to think about it. And because it's 1/2 step lower than 6, we're going to put a little flat in front of it to show that we're bringing it down by 1/2 step. And we can see the same thing play out here. 7 is happening here in the natural minor scale, whereas 7 is happening over here in the major scale. So because it's happening 1/2 step sooner, 1/2 step lower, we're going to put that little flat accidental in front of the scale degree. So in summary, whenever we have a note in the natural minor scale that is 1/2 step lower than it would normally be in the major scale, we're going to add a flat accidental to it to show that it's 1/2 lower than the major scale. And the reason for this is that in music theory, we like comparing things to the major scale. It's that simple. There's no other reason than we really like comparing things to the major scale. So we're going to compare minor scale degrees to major scale degrees and say, okay, well, in relation to scale degree 3 in the major scale, sure enough, scale degree 3 in the natural minor scale is 1/2 step lower. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you're going to learn all about the E natural minor scale. So we can see with the E natural minor scale, it has the minor step formula of whole, half, whole, half, whole. That's good. We can see that scale degree 3, scale degree 6, and scale degree 7 have flats in front of them to show that, sure enough, they are 1/2 step lower than for a major scale. Here's where things get interesting. Between scale degree 1 and scale degree 2, we need a whole step. So how do we find a whole step? If there were no sharp accidental here, this would be E to F, and that would be a half step, which would be wrong. So what we do is, just like in the G major scale, between scale degree 6 and scale degree 7, between the E and the F in the G major scale, we need to raise that F sharp up by 1/2 step. We need to do the same thing here. We need to raise the F sharp up by 1/2 step. Then you see we have G, A, B, C, D, and then back to E, so that this E natural minor scale follows all the rules for natural minor scales. It has some kind of A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. We don't have 2 Fs, we only have 1 F. That F is sharp. And that F is sharp because of the series of whole and half steps that we need to make a natural minor scale. Let's compare a natural minor scale to a major scale. You will hear that there's a difference, and that the major scale sounds more happy, the natural minor scale sounds more sad, or like it's thinking about something. So here's the major scale. How jolly. Here's the natural minor scale. Descending. So you can hear there is a real emotional difference between the major scale and the minor scale. I will see you in the next lesson. Before you learn how to write out your natural minor scales, there's actually going to be something that, if you learn it first, is going to make your life so much easier, and that is relative scales and keys. So we're going to start there, and then in a later lesson, you're going to learn how to actually write out natural minor scales. Relative scales and keys share the same key signature and the same notes, but start on different tonics for the scales. The key signature is going to be the same. And we're going to explore that a little bit more. So what are relative scales and keys? Each key signature can be used for both a major and a minor scale or key. This relationship between the connected major key to the connected minor key that share the same key signature, it's called the relative major and the relative minor. When they share the same key signature, they also have the same notes, just in a different order. So how do we find relative major and relative minors? How do we know which two scales are connected? Two scales that are connected are a C major scale and an A natural minor scale. So the way you find the relative minor of a major scale, so we're thinking about the major scale and we're saying, oh, what natural minor scale is connected to this major scale? Well, all you have to do is count up to scale degree 6 of the major scale. So let's use the C major scale as an example. Let's start on C. C is scale degree 1. So we go C, D, E, F, G, A. Scale degree 6. And then what we do is we do a little magic trick, is we start on scale degree 6 and we just continue saying the note names from the C major scale, just starting on scale degree 6. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And sure enough, right there, we just said all the names of all the notes in an A natural minor scale. So the connection is between a C major scale and an A natural minor scale. And the way we find that A natural minor scale is to start on scale degree 6 of the C major scale and then just say all the same notes as a C major scale, but starting and ending on A. Let's take a look at our graphic. So we have C, D, E, F, G. We get to scale degree 6, which is sure enough A. And then we do our little magic trick, and we call scale degree 6 scale degree 1. And we keep on going up the C major scale, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And sure enough, those are the same exact notes as the A natural minor scale. So how we find the relative minor of a major scale is we count up to scale degree 6. I will see you in the next lesson. This is going to be a quick lesson on how to find the relative major of a minor scale or key. In the last lesson, we talked about taking a major scale like C major and counting up to the scale degree 6 to get A, and then starting on A and saying all the same notes as the C major, but just starting and ending on A, and all of a sudden we have an A natural minor scale. What we're going to talk about here is how to find the major or the relative major of a minor scale or key. And how we would do that is we'd start on A natural minor. So we say, okay, A, then we go B, C, and on scale degree 3, we continue to say all the same notes as would be in an A natural minor, just starting and ending on C. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and sure enough, right there, we have the C major scale. Now, this is a useful way of finding relative majors of natural minor scales. However, I think it's going to be most useful for you to think about finding the relative minor from the major scale, counting up to scale degree 6, and then using that as your foundation. That way you have one way to think about doing it. You have one way you have to remember finding that connection between the relative major and the relative minor keys. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to take a look at some color-coded note connections between relative major and relative minor keys. So all relative scales and keys share the same notes, and the scales just have a different order, but it's all the same notes. So let's look at our C major notes to our A natural minor notes. So sure enough, we have C and we have C, and those are all color-coded so we can see the connection very clearly. We have D and we have D. We have E, we have E. F, F, and it's all color-coded. G, G, A, A. And then maybe a different color for B because it's red. Then we have B to B. So you can see it's all the same notes in a C major scale as there is in an A natural minor scale. Now let's talk about the G major scale. So in the same way we counted up to scale degree 6, of the C major scale to find A, and then we just said all the note names of a C major scale starting and ending on A, we can do the same exact thing with a G major scale. So we start on G, G becomes 1. So we go G, A, B, C, D, E. E is 6. So now we do our little magic trick. E is no longer 6, E is 1. And we're just going to say the names of the notes for a G major scale. E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E. That's it. So the relative natural minor scale, or the relative minor of G major, is E minor, or E natural minor for the scale. And we can see this connection play out because they both share the same exact notes. Sure enough, G to G, A to A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, whoop, going backwards, E, F, whoop, going backwards, F sharp to F sharp. It's all the same exact notes. It's just in a different order. And that's how we get the connection between the relative major and the relative natural minor scales. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to look at relative major and minor scales in a different way, focusing this time on the scale degrees. So we can actually think about scale degrees and also the notes in the scale this way. So let's look at C major and A minor. This is another way of envisioning and understanding visually the connection between the relative major and the relative minor, in this case, a C major scale and an A natural minor scale. Remember, to find the natural minor, we count up to scale degree 6 in a major scale, and then we just start on scale degree 6. We whoop, scale degree 6 becomes scale degree 1, and then we just say all the note names for the major scale starting on scale degree 6 going up 1 octave. So in step 1 here, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a C major scale. And sure enough, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Those are all the notes in a C major scale. We're missing the C 1 octave up, but those are the 7 different notes in a C major scale. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take scale degree 6 and 7, and we're going to, pop them in right here. See that? We're taking scale degree 6 and 7, we're breaking it off the end like a Kit Kat, if you will, and then putting that Kit Kat piece in the front. So now the order of the notes is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and this order right here is the order for the A natural minor scale. Then all we're going to do is rearrange the scale degrees, and we have, boom, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, which are the scale degrees for an A natural minor scale. And we also have the correct notes in the correct order for an A natural minor scale. So if the previous explanations for the connection between C major and A natural minor scales didn't quite make sense, hopefully this other way of visualizing it is going to help bring that home. And even if those other explanations did make sense to you, this is going to reinforce your understanding just so you can see it in a different way. It's all the same notes. All we're doing is changing the order. That's it. It's literally the same notes. So a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, versus A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. It's all the same notes, just in a different order, and that's what makes it sound different. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to do a deep dive into relative keys. We've talked a lot about relative scales in the past couple of lessons. What we're going to do now is understand the connection between the relative keys. So as you may remember from the key signature lessons, a key signature, it's like a bucket or a summary of all the notes in the scale, and it's showing us that at the beginning of the music before we actually play, write, or make music. So what we're going to do is we're going to look here. We have all the notes of a C major scale. which are exactly the same as all the notes of an A natural minor scale. And we're going to take all those notes and we're going to put them in the key bucket. See, we just emptied out all our notes and we put them in the key bucket. Now, because we put all these notes in the key bucket, we're now showing right here the summary of all these notes. And the summary of all these notes is that, sure, we have a C, we have a D, we have an E, we have an F, we have a G, we have an A, and we have a B. But there's no sharps or flats, and because there's no sharps or flats, we're not going to put that in the key signature. So a C major scale and an A natural minor scale actually share the same key signature because they share the same notes, just in a different order. So the key signature doesn't care what order the notes are in, it just cares what the notes are from the scale. So we can use this key signature right here, no sharps or no flats, to show the key signature for C major or A minor. Let's look at one more. Let's look at the connection between G major and E natural minor. Now we can see, just like we saw a couple of lessons ago, that the G major scale and the E natural minor scale have exactly the same notes. They both have a G, A, B, C, D, E, and an F sharp, just in different orders. Now what happens when we take all those notes, we throw them in our note bucket, or our key bucket, we have from both scales, and again, the order, the key signature doesn't care about the order, but we have from both scales a G, an a B, a C, a D, an E, and an F. What? Sharp. And so what the key signature is doing is it's saying, listen, the order of the notes doesn't matter. It could be E natural minor. It could be G major. The key signature doesn't care. All it cares about are the notes, not the order of the notes, but the notes. And all the notes in a G major scale and an E natural minor scale are exactly the same. And because they are exactly the same, they share the same key signature. So 1 sharp on line 5 is the key signature for G major and for E minor. I will see you in the next lesson. We have one more connection to make between our relative major and minor scales. So far you've understood that, for example, a G major and an E natural minor scale have the same exact notes, just in a different order. We can find that E natural minor scale by counting up to scale degree 6 in the major scale of G, so G, A, B, C, D, E. And then we start on E, whoop, becomes scale degree 1, and then we just count up from E to E using all the notes of a G major scale, and hey presto, we have all the notes of an E natural minor scale, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E. One more thing to point out is there is a connection between the minor step formula and the major step formula, and that is this. So if we look at our major step formula goes whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Right here. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now, just like before when we visualized the connection between the natural minor and the major scale, or the relative major and the relative minor, by moving the scale degrees around, we're actually going to do the same thing with scale degrees and the step formula. So watch what happens. When we move the step formula, so we have this whole and half here. That's what we're moving. Between scale degree 6 and scale degree 7 is a whole. Between scale degree 7 and scale degree 1 is a half. That's what we're moving. So when we move our whole and half and we go to insert it at the beginning, so we're going to push 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 over to the right, and we're going to insert this whole and half at the beginning. All of a sudden what happens is we get whole half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. And if that's ringing a bell, it should, because that's actually the minor step formula. So there is a rhyme and there is a reason to why the natural minor step formula is whole, half, whole, half, whole, and that's because that's how the whole and the half steps work out when we start on scale degree 6 of the major scale, or rather when we start on scale degree 1 of the natural minor scale, but when the relative majors and the relative minors, that's the same thing. I will see you in the next lesson where you will finally write out the natural minor scale. I'll see you there. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to write the natural minor scale for E and A, the relative minors of C and G major, with accidentals. So step number 1 is going to write a treble clef and a double bar line. Step number 2 is you're going to write the first note of the scale in any octave register, leaving yourself one octave to go up, obviously. So you could start the scale on E4 or E3 if you're writing an E. And if you're writing an A, you could start on A3 or A4. Step number 3 is to write out, just like the major scale, one note on every line and every space of the staff until you get to scale degree 1 of the scale, one octave higher. Next, I do encourage you to label the whole and half steps for the minor step formula. That's whole, half, whole, and then add in accidentals according to that formula. So whole, half, whole. Now we're going to write out the E and the A natural minor scale ascending on some staff paper. Step number 1, we need to write a treble clef. Step number 2, we need a double bar line. I'll do mine over here. You could do yours at the end of the staff. Okay, step number 3, we're going to write the note we're going to start on. We're going to start with an A natural minor scale ascending, and we're going to start on A3. So we're going to start on the A below the staff and write out our ledger lines and an A note. Then we write one note on every line and space of the staff until we get one octave higher than scale degree 1, or the note we started on. So at space, this is a line, space, line, space, line, space. Then we're going to write our whole and half step minor formula. That's whole, half, half, whole. Once you've done that, you're going to go back and check and make sure all the notes you've written are correct and you do not need to write any accidentals. So between A and B, we have A sharp or B flat. That means we're going 2 houses down in the full musical alphabet. That is correct. That is a whole step. Between B and C, there are no sharps and no flats. They are direct neighbors in the full musical alphabet, which means that is correct. That is a half step. Between C and D, we're skipping C sharp or D flat, which means sure enough from C to D, that is a whole step because we're going 2 houses down in the full musical alphabet. And from D to E, we're skipping D sharp or E flat, which means we're going 2 houses down in the full musical alphabet. Now from E to F, E and F are direct neighbors on the full musical alphabet, which means that is a half step, so that is correct. From F to G, we're skipping F sharp or G flat because we want a whole step. So from F to G is 2 houses down on the full musical alphabet. That's a whole step. And from G to A, we're skipping G sharp or A flat. That's 2 houses down on the full musical alphabet. That is a whole step. So that's how we write an A natural minor scale with accidentals, but because there were no accidentals needed, we didn't actually use any accidentals. Next up, we're going to write an E natural minor scale. So we start with a treble clef. Next, we write a double bar line. Then we're going to write the note we're going to start on. I'm going to start on an E3, but you could start on an E4. We need a bunch of ledger lines here. There we go. And starting on E. Now we need to write one note on every line or space of the staff or treble clef until we get to E, one octave higher. So here we go. This one's going to take a minute because we got a lot of ledger lines we got to write. So first note was on a space, or in a space rather. Next note is on a line. Then we go to in a space. Next note is going to be on a line. Next note is in a space. Next note is on a line. Next note is in a space. And finally, we make it to the staff on a line. Next thing for us to do is to write our whole and half steps. So we have whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Now let's check our whole and half steps to make sure we have the correct notes and we do or do not need to add any accidentals. So between E and F, we have a whole step that we need to write, but we have a problem there because E and F are direct neighbors in the full musical alphabet, and we need a whole step. So direct neighbors are half steps. 2 houses down is a whole step. So we need to skip F, and we need to go up to F sharp. F E to F sharp. Then from F sharp to G, those are direct neighbors on the full musical alphabet. That is a half step. From G to A, we're going to skip G sharp or A flat. That's going to get us our whole step. From A to B, we're going to skip A sharp or B flat. So sure enough, that's a whole step. From B to C, there's no sharps or flats between them. So we have our half step right there. From C to D, we have a whole step because we're skipping C sharp or D flat. And from D to E, we're skipping D sharp or E flat, so that's another whole step there. Now, as the last thing you can do, you can actually go in and write out your scale degrees. So 1, 2, 3, add the flat for minor. 4, 5, 6, add the flat. 7, add the flat. And then we're back to 1, which you can think of as 8, but is really just scale degree 1. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn how to write descending natural minor scales with accidentals. So we follow exactly the same process as for writing the ascending natural minor scales with accidentals, except obviously we're going to do a descending scale instead of an ascending scale. So step number 1 is to set yourself up with a line of staff with a treble clef and a double bar line. Step number 2 is to pick whatever note you're going to start on. You could start on E5 or E4. Step number 3 is you write one note on every line and space of the staff until you reach the same note you started on, scale degree 1, 1 octave lower. Next step, write in your whole and your half steps from right to left this time. Because remember, we only want to think about whole and half steps ascending. We don't want to spin it around and have to think about it descending. And then we double check our whole and half steps from right to left. Again, because we want to think about this scale as ascending, we don't want to have to think about it 2 different ways. All right, let's jump into some staff paper and write these scales out. Step number 1, let's write our treble clef. Step number 2, let's write a double bar line. And you can write yours all the way at the end of the staff and really space your notes out, but I tend to write a little closer because I'm so zoomed in to make sure you can see all the detail. So descending, I'm going to start on, well, I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm going to start on E5 so I don't have to write all those ledger lines for you. So here we go. We're going to start on E. Next step is to write one note on every line and space of the staff until, or ledger lines, until we get to the same note that we started on 1 octave lower. So here we go. We started in a space, on a line, in a space, on a line, in a space, on a line, in a space, on a line. Now, because this is a descending scale, we're going to do our whole and half step swoops from the right to the left as opposed to left to the right. So we can think about it as whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. And then we're going to check our whole and half counting again from right to left. So from E to F, that's a half step. We need to make that in F sharp. F sharp to G is a half step. G to A is a whole step. A to B is a whole step. B to C is a half step. C to D is a whole step. And D to E is a whole step. Now, for a bonus, you can actually write down your scale degrees. We have scale degree 1. We have scale degree 7. I'm going to put that flat in front of it. Then we have scale degree 6. I'm going to put that flat there. Then scale degree 5. Scale degree 4. Scale degree 3 with a flat, remember, because it's 1/2 step lower than for a major scale. Scale degree 2, and then we're back to scale degree 1. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to understand how to write natural minor scales with key signatures. So as you learned when we talked about the relative keys, C major and A minor share the same key signature because they have the same notes, and the key signature is just showing what notes are in the scale. And G major and E natural minor also share the same key signature because the key signature is just showing what notes are in the scale. So to write a natural minor scale with a key signature, first you'll write your treble clef, your double bar line. You'll add in your key signature if applicable. Remember, for C major and A minor, all you got to do is nothing because there's no sharps or no flats in those notes. And because there's no sharps or flats in those notes, the key signature doesn't need any accidentals in it. So you write the key signature, then you write your starting note, and then you write one note on every line or space of the staff until you get to the note 1 octave higher for ascending or 1 octave lower for descending. And because you've put in your key signature, no further action is needed. Because remember, you don't need to write in the F sharp accidental here because this sharp in the key signature makes all the Fs. It doesn't matter what octave register they are. The entire pitch class of F is now the pitch class of F sharp. So even though this F is down here, F4, and that sharp accidental is on the line for F5, that F is still automatically sharp, so you don't actually need to do anything. And the same thing for writing descending scales with key signatures. And the same thing for writing descending natural minor scales with key signatures. You just have your staff, your treble clef, your double bar line. You write your key signature, or in the case of C major and A minor, you don't do anything. You write your starting note, which would be an A or an E, and then you write your descending scale down to 1 octave below, writing one note on every line or space of the staff. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to learn the natural minor scale degree names. Just like the major scale, the natural minor scale notes each have a name. Here's the cool thing. Even though scale degree 3 and 6 have a flat in front of them, they still keep the same name. So if you've gone ahead and memorized the scale degree names for the major scale, tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant, you have 6/7 of the natural minor scale memorized already. All you've got to do is memorize that scale degree 7 in the natural minor scale is called the subtonic. And the reason why scale degree 7 is called the subtonic, I will show you why. So here's an A natural minor scale. Now I'm going to play that A natural minor scale, but I'm going to raise the subtonic to a leading tone. Listen to the difference. Ooh, that sounds very different. Here it is without the leading tone, just with a subtonic. So you can see how different the feeling is of the scale when we change scale degree 7th down, that scale degree 3, sure, it sounds different. Scale degree 6, sure, it sounds different. But scale degree 7 just fundamentally acts differently. It's not leading us back to the tonic in the same way that the major scale leads us to the tonic. The natural minor scale, between scale degree 7 and scale degree 8, 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 8, there isn't that same pull, there isn't that same push, that same momentum to go back to scale degree 1, to go back to the tonic. And so because that scale degree 7 really just functions differently, it acts differently, it does not push the scale to go back to the tonic in the same way, that's why we change the name of it and we call it the subtonic, because these names again describe what the note is doing in the scale. And because scale degree 7 is not leading us back to the tonic, we can no longer call it a leading tone, we call it a subtonic. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, you are going to learn about pentachords. Now, just like tetrachords, pentachords are a group of notes, but instead of a group of 4 notes, pentachords are a group of 5 notes, just like the Pentagon is a 5-sided building, or a pentathlon is a 5-activity sports event. So penta means 5. So the pentachords we're going to talk about are going to start on scale degree 1 of a major scale, or scale degree 1 of a natural minor scale. Pentachords are really important because they are the biggest and most immediate difference between a major scale and a minor scale. In the first 5 notes of a major scale, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the first 5 notes of a natural minor scale, we have 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5. And the pentachord is actually going to be very important in coming chapters because we're going to break down a lot of concepts just using this pentachord. So let's look at a C major pentachord. A C major pentachord is just the first 5 notes of a C major scale. A G major pentachord would just be the first 5 notes of a G major scale. An A minor pentachord, well, that's just the first 5 notes of an A natural minor scale. And an E minor pentachord, well, that's just the first 5 notes of an E natural minor scale. So a pentachord is just going to be the first 5 notes of a major scale or a natural minor scale. So for example, we have a major pentachord here. Here's a minor pentachord. Major pentachord, minor pentachord. And so already there, that difference between the happy major and the sad or the thinking minor really comes down to one single note, and that is the 3. If the 3 is left alone, it sounds happy. The 3 is natural, it sounds happy. If the 3 is flattened, if it's brought down 1/2 step, all of a sudden we start to have that sad, thoughtful sound. I will see you in the next lesson. Oh, but it's not over yet. Click here to watch the next video lesson or up here for the full video playlist.